Chapter 18, Amended Returns, Extensions, and Other Necessary Information. The following forms and publications were used in the research and development of this lesson. Forms and publications are available at www.irs.gov. The primary form to use with this lesson is the 1040X. The objectives of this lesson is to be familiar with an amendment and what are the requirements with filing that form. Students will also understand that Form 4868 is for the individual to file paperwork and not if they owe any money. Must comprehend what is involved in the installment agreement, how quickly the IRS wants the balance due paid. The student will realize what authority comes when they file Form 8821. Here is what a 1040X looks like. The idea of a 1040X is to change something that was done on the return. Generally, amendments are done for the past 3 years only, especially if there is additional refund coming to the taxpayer. There is a 3-year window of opportunity to get any additional refunds. Here is the income and deduction amount and on the Form 1040X. The key here under the 1040X is that first you have A column, which is the original amount from the initial tax return as it was filed and transmitted to the IRS. Then there is a net change, which is the amount of increase or decrease, and then the correct amount. Many instances, what happens, a client will come in January, want his tax return done right away to get his refund, and then later on during tax season receives additional forms that he wasn't remembering that he was going to get. Perhaps a second W-2 with some job that he did early in the past year and only for a couple of weeks, so totally forgot about it. In many instances, it's not a sizable amount, and therefore you could tell them they don't have to do an amendment. If it's minor, if there's not a lot of change, don't worry about it. If the IRS cares to make a change, they will send you a notice and you pay the minor difference. But that is up to the client, and so it's just very important to fully detail and explain if you do or if you don't. But all of your amendments have the columns A, B, and C to be able to report the change. Cannot be transmitted electronically either. An amendment must be mailed in. Amended returns and can be claims for a refund, or it could be that you actually owe more money. It's a time for filing to claim a refund, processing claims for refunds, a late filed return, limit on amount of refund, and of course, tax paid. So preparing a new Form 1040, the IRS scrutinizes amended tax returns a little more carefully. That means as a good tax professional, you will need to exercise extra diligence to make sure the new 1040 is as complete as possible. It does not matter if the original tax return was filed using 1040EZ or 1040A forms. Part 2, preparing the Form 1040X. Before starting Form 1040X, always have in front of you the taxpayer's original tax return and their new Form 1040. Form 1040X basically summarizes information from the newly revised Form 1040. The tax professional will be transferring information from the correct 1040 to the 1040X form and then showing and noting the difference under column B. There's also a need to put in the explanation of changes. I remember one where the client did not include his 18-year-old son. Did not understand at the time that he could still claim them even though the son had gone to college. He figured he couldn't claim him, he was now on his own. And after interviewing him more, determining if he had properly still supported him and paid for more than 50% of his living support, and it was showing that he did qualify, then of course an amendment was done to include the son after all. So on Form 1040X, write the income, the deductions, and credits as originally reported on the return in column A, the changes being made in column B, and then the corrected amounts in column C. Then figure the tax on the corrected amount of taxable income and the amount owed or to be refunded. If the taxpayer owes tax, taxpayer should pay the full amount with Form 1040X. The tax owed will not be subtracted from any amount credited to estimated tax. If the taxpayer cannot pay the full amount due with the amended return, he can ask to make monthly installment payments. If the taxpayer overpaid tax, they can have all or part of the overpayment refunded to them, or they can apply all or part of it to the estimated tax. If they choose to get a refund, it will be sent separately from any refund shown on the original return. And if the additional refund is after the end of tax season or after April 15th, he could see some additional interest on the refund. Now, if a person is claiming or is classified as financially disabled, then he may not have to pay his tax in time. Now, the time periods are suspended when a taxpayer is financially disabled. A statement is required from a qualified physician. Now, there are exceptions for special types of refunds. Bad debt. Now, bad debt may be something you can prove or cannot. You must be able to prove that you had a personal bad debt that will allow you to take a special type of refund. Worthless securities, net operating loss carryback, foreign tax paid, and injured spouse claim. It's important it could result in you taking the claim to court. That could result in a reduced refund. And of course, it can also affect and have an effect on state tax liability. Now, if you are wanting an extension, this is a copy of Form 4868, which is an application for automatic extension. It's automatic for 6 months. Now, remember, an extension is only for paperwork. It gives you an additional 6 months to be able to pull all your information together and have all the documentation in place that perhaps you couldn't get done in a timely fashion by April 15th. If the taxpayer owes taxes, they are still due on April 15th, even if extensions have been filed. Knowing this, I mention this to clients because they'll usually think of an extension as an extension to pay. When I explain to them that that's not the case, in many instances they'll say, "Oh, forget it," and then either file, and because they usually they can go ahead and file the tax return, they just don't have the money to pay the balance due. If they want to and do need the extension to gather all their information together, then you can see there in Part 2 a estimated balance due and amount you are paying. Now, if you pay a balance due amount, estimated amount, with this filing of automatic extension, and then 6 months later you file a return and your balance due is actually less, you will get a refund of the difference at that time. Also, here's a sample of an installment agreement request. We'd already looked at this. There's a fee to set up the agreement. It's a late payment penalty will be charged, and they are wanting the balance due paid off in 36 months or less. Federal income tax, the withholding on the W-2 is based on how the taxpayer fills out Form W-4. Since World War II, it has been a requirement, and the law is you must pay tax as you go along. That is why if you're self-employed, there are quarterly estimated tax payments. The intent is at the end of the tax year, you don't have any balance due, that you would have had enough withheld based on the amount of income you've received. And you determine that with your W-4, and a W-4 can be changed at any time. Here is again a payment voucher form for 1040V. from 2012. Form 8821 only authorizes individuals to receive confidential information in an IRS office for the types of taxes listed on the form. It does not give the individual the power to represent the taxpayer. Now here's an interesting form, Injured Spouse Allocation Form 8379. The key with this form and what happens is that a person gets married and one spouse owes a lot of back taxes or child support or the student loans. And with either of those back due amounts, when a tax return is done, especially a married filing joint, any refund goes to pay those back taxes or back child support. Now, in many cases, the one spouse who married doesn't have that debt. And so she doesn't want her refund to go and pay for the other one's back debt. That is where Form 8379, Injured Spouse Allocation, comes into play. This allows you, it's not changing, and this doesn't even have to be an amendment later on. It's not changing the amount of income or deductions or refund. It's simply allocating to one spouse and the other so that the amount of refund that would be eligible to the injured spouse, she can still receive that refund. The balance will go to pay back the back taxes or back child support or student loan agreements. Innocent spouse relief is an interesting one. This one is Form 8857. Innocent spouse is when one spouse or the other does something they shouldn't have. The best example I can give you is I had clients who came back in with a letter from the IRS because there was an error in their tax return. Of course, they figured I made the error. Well, they brought it back in where they sat down with me, but all in a huff, especially the wife, because of this error, and what was I going to do to fix it? As we reviewed the letter, it showed that there was about $17,000 of W-2G income that had not been reported when the tax return was completed. And so we looked it up, and I had no record of any W-2G. Those, remember, are the W-2s for gambling winnings. And as I explained it to them and showed them what the IRS was saying, I looked at them and said, did you have? I have no record of any gambling winnings been noted or included in the tax return. And the woman was quite indignant. She's like, well, of course not. We don't gamble. While in the meantime, the husband was sitting there very quietly. She finally turned to him when she realized he wasn't saying anything. And as it turns out, he had gone and had won about $17,000 in gambling winnings and certainly never told his wife about it. So here she was, not only shocked, but embarrassed. And so I recommended doing the innocent spouse form. This would allow her to get her refund, but again, the balance would be due on what he now owes as back taxes. Since he did not include that and there was no federal tax withheld from the various winnings, he had $17,000 to pay in tax. And again, the tax on the $17,000 income. Now, this form is not so easy to just, okay, sure, fine. Because you literally will have to create almost like a application, like a loan application. You're going to reveal all the assets and liabilities that you have and all the personal information for financial to determine if it's truly an innocent spouse. And it can take, either form can take several months before a decision is made and the person receives any final notice. That completes Chapter 18. Be sure to go to Review Questions and TPAs online. Be sure to pass with a 70% or better. It's time to read Chapter 19 and it's time to start studying for your final. Thank you.